Do you think you already understand the Strait of Hormuz? A headline that repeats itself every few years whenever world powers make threats and financial markets hold their breath. You have absorbed the version that the news constructed for you, clean, strategic, and stripped of everything that makes a place real. You believe it is a choke point, suffocating the global energy markets because that is the only version the media has ever shown you. The Strait of Hormuz is not like anything you've ever been told. What survives here survives not because conditions allowed it, but because the people and organisms that stayed learned something that the rest of the world is only beginning to need to know. This is the Strait of Hormuz that no headline has ever shown you. And once you see it, the headlines will never look the same again. Hormuz Island sits approximately 5 miles off the coast of Bandar Abbas in the southern Persian Gulf. A formation of roughly 18 square miles that looks, from above, less like an island and more like a wound in the surface of the sea. The geology is not decorative. It is exposed. 570 million years of compression, heat, and mineral movement have been lifted to the surface and left there, unobscured by soil or vegetation, available to anyone willing to look directly at what the planet is made of. The iron oxide in the rock surface produces a red so saturated it reads as artificial, not the rust red of an aged pipe or the brick red of a northern landscape, but a deep arterial red that intensifies under direct sun until the cliffs appear to generate their own light. This iron bleeds into the coastal water at the island's edge, staining the sea in gradients from orange to pink before dissolving into the Gulf's blue. Moving inland from the iron-red coast, the landscape shifts through sulfuric yellow into bands of white salt crystal that catch sunlight with an intensity that requires sunglasses most of the year. Then violet. Then a gray-green that resembles the skin of something living. These transitions happen within meters of each other, geological time compressed into a walk of 20 minutes. Geologists classify the island as a salt dome, formed when underground salt deposits under enormous tectonic pressure pushed upward through overlying rock over millions of years, carrying with them mineral passengers from every layer they passed through. The result is a landscape that has no geological twin anywhere on the planet. The Persian Gulf is, by any standard ecological measure, an environment in which coral should not grow. Summer surface temperatures regularly reach 36 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the symbiotic algae that sustain coral by providing photosynthetic nutrition abandon the coral tissue in a process called bleaching. In virtually every ocean on Earth, sustained temperatures at this level produce mass mortality events visible from satellites. Entire reef systems that took thousands of years to build can collapse within weeks. The reefs around Hormuz Island and the surrounding islands of the strait have not collapsed. This is not resilience in the motivational sense of the word. It is genetic selection operating across timescales that dwarf human civilization. The individual corals, whose physiology could not tolerate the Gulf's heat, died without reproducing. Those whose cellular mechanisms could manage the thermal stress survived, reproduced, and passed that capacity forward. What remains is a reef community whose heat tolerance represents one of the most significant documented cases of adaptive evolution in contemporary marine science. For the marine biologists who have spent careers studying these reefs, their existence raises a question of enormous practical consequence. For the fishermen who have worked these waters across generations, none of this registers as remarkable. The reef is where the fish are. The fish are what sustains a family. The relationship between the fisherman and the reef is the oldest form of ecological knowledge, which is to say, it is simply knowledge of where things are and what they need to continue being there. Qeshm Island holds a different kind of secret. Stretching 87 miles along the strait's northern edge, Qeshm is the largest island in the Persian Gulf. It does not announce itself. There is no single dramatic feature that organizes the landscape into a postcard. What Qeshm offers instead is an accumulation of extremities that add up to something beyond any individual element. A population that has spent centuries not merely surviving these conditions, but constructing an entire civilization specifically calibrated to them. The day on Qeshm does not follow the clock. It follows the sun's position and the heat index it produces. Before 5 in the morning, when the darkness still holds the overnight cool, the island activates. Boats push off from shore. Markets fill and empty. Essential work compresses itself into the hours before the heat becomes the primary fact of existence. By early afternoon, the island does not slow gradually. It stops. This is not lethargy. It is an understanding, refined across centuries, that certain hours belong to a force that cannot be negotiated with and should not be challenged without necessity. In the evening, when the temperature drops enough to permit outdoor existence, Qeshm reconstitutes itself. The ancient village of Loft on Qeshm's northwestern coast rises from the Gulf's edge in a configuration that appears organic rather than planned. Coral stone and mud brick buildings press close together, their walls thick enough to function as thermal storage, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it slowly through the night. Above the rooflines, at irregular intervals, the vertical shafts of wind towers extend upward with their openings oriented toward the northwest, toward the prevailing breeze that arrives from the direction of the Iranian interior across the water. These structures, some standing for over 1,000 years, solve a problem that air conditioning solves, with electricity and machinery and the environmental consequences that both imply. A wind tower captures air at roof level where it moves faster and, crucially, where it is several degrees cooler than the air at street level. It channels that air downward through internal passages, using the pressure differential between the tower's upper opening and the building's interior to create a sustained flow without any mechanical assistance. The temperature reduction inside a building served by a functioning wind tower is documented at between 8 and 11 degrees Celsius compared to the exterior. In an environment where 45 degrees is routine, 11 degrees is the difference between a space that can be inhabited and one that cannot. This is not engineering in the modern sense of a solution derived from physical principles applied by trained specialists. It is engineering in the older sense of a problem solved through observation, iteration, and the preservation of successful solutions across generations. The wind tower works because the people who built the first ones noticed which orientations channeled air and which did not, built accordingly, passed the observation forward, and watched the next generation refine it. The accumulated knowledge of 1,000 years of hot summers is embedded in the angle of an opening in a mud brick wall. Loft also contains 366 ancient wells. The number is precise and not accidental. The system was designed so that each well served the community once per year in rotation, allowing the freshwater reserve in each shaft to recover across the remaining 365 days before being drawn upon again. The aquifer beneath the village generated limited fresh water, not enough for daily use from a single source without eventual depletion. The rotation system preserved the total reserve by distributing the withdrawal across the entire network across the entire year. It is a solution that required not just the construction of 366 wells, but the social infrastructure to maintain a rotation protocol across generations and across the disruptions that generations inevitably bring. What this represents is not ingenuity in the sense of a clever individual solving a problem in a moment of inspiration. It is collective intelligence sustained across time. The survival of a community encoded in the management of its most essential resource, the forest that grows in poison. Along Qeshm's southern and eastern coastline, the Hara protected area covers approximately 35 square kilometers of tidal channels, mudflats, and dense mangrove forest. The Avicennia marina trees that constitute this forest have solved one of biology's more fundamental contradictions. They grow in salt water, not despite the salt, but through an active physiological mechanism that processes and expels it. The root system filters the salt from the water drawn upward through the tree. The excess salt is secreted through the leaf surfaces in visible crystals that coat the foliage in a white mineral residue. The trees breathe through aerial roots called pneumatophores, vertical protrusions that push up through the anaerobic mud of the tidal flat to reach oxygen that the waterlogged soil cannot provide. The entire organism functions as a biological impossibility, rendered possible by a million years of incremental adaptation to conditions that killed less capable individuals and left as survivors those whose physiology could manage the extremity. From above, the Hara forest reads as a dense green labyrinth pressed against the Gulf's blue edge, threaded by tidal channels that narrow from boat width to arm width as they penetrate deeper into the canopy. From within, moving through those channels at water level, the forest produces an enclosure that city dwellers who have spent their lives in open space rarely encounter. The light filtered green through the canopy overhead, the mud below, the water between. The sound of birds using the forest as a way station on migrations that span continents, moving through a forest they have never seen before by instinct calibrated to its existence. The Hara forest is not a wilderness in the sense of a place untouched by human use. The fishing communities that have worked the tidal channels for generations developed harvesting practices calibrated to the forest's capacity to regenerate what is taken from it. The forest produces the nutrient conditions that sustain the shrimp and juvenile fish populations of the surrounding Gulf. It is the nursery on which the offshore fisheries depend. A community that destroys its mangrove destroys the foundation of its protein supply within a generation. This understanding was not derived from ecology textbooks. It was derived from watching what happened when the relationship between harvest and regeneration was disrupted, and understanding what that disruption meant for the following season's catch. Traditional ecological knowledge operates on this principle. Learning encoded not in formal documentation, but in the behavioral adjustments of communities responding to the evidence in front of them across time. The boats that exist nowhere except in the hands that build them. In the boatyards of Qeshm and the Hormuz coast, a tradition of wooden boat construction continues that UNESCO has recognized as an element of intangible cultural heritage, a category designed for knowledge that exists in no written form and can be transmitted only through direct physical demonstration between people. The Lenge, a traditional Persian Gulf cargo vessel built from teak and other hardwoods traded across the Gulf's historical maritime networks, is constructed by craftsmen who carry in their hands and eyes the complete technical specifications of an ocean-going wooden vessel without a single measurement being recorded on paper. The width of the hull at any given point along its length is determined by the builder's eye, calibrated against decades of experience with how wood under stress at sea behaves. The keel angle is established through a judgment that combines the builder's understanding of the Gulf's depth profile, its seasonal wind patterns, and the specific cargo the vessel is intended to carry. The placement of structural members follows a logic embedded not in diagrams, but in the spatial memory of hands that have assembled hundreds of hulls from the same starting point. This knowledge was not always valued as knowledge in the institutional sense. For much of the 20th century, as fiberglass and outboard motors transformed small boat fishing across the Gulf, the Lenge tradition contracted steadily. The craftsmen who practiced it aged without attracting sufficient numbers of apprentices willing to commit to the years of observation and practice required to begin to understand what the experienced builders knew. The Portuguese who documented Lenge construction in the 16th century would recognize the vessels being built today because the method has not changed. The threat to the tradition is not innovation, but attrition. When the number of people who hold this knowledge in their bodies drops below the threshold required for transmission, the knowledge ends. The face covering that is a library. On Hormuz Island and the surrounding coastal communities, the women's burqa, a structured face covering of embroidered fabric that covers the nose and the space above the eyes while leaving the lower face visible, began as environmental engineering and became, over centuries, a system of communication. The Gulf sun, reflected from salt white ground and from open water, generates ultraviolet exposure that damages unprotected skin severely across a working lifetime. The facial surfaces the burqa covers, the nose ridge and the brow area, are precisely those that catch the most direct reflected light during outdoor work. In a Gulf coastal environment, the covering worked. It protected. And because it worked and persisted, it became available as a medium. The embroidery patterns applied to a woman's burqa communicate her marital status. The specific construction technique identifies her regional origin. The color combinations, in communities where the tradition remains dense enough to read, signal family lineage to observers trained in the code from childhood. What looks from outside like a uniform garment is, from inside the tradition, a text. Each burqa is specific. Its specificity is readable to those who know how to read it, and opaque to those who do not, which is a reasonable description of any language. The burqa is a language worn on the face, developed in a community where outdoor work required sun protection, and where the covering required for protection was already present and available to carry additional meaning. The tradition is narrowing. The craftswomen who produce burqas with the technical and symbolic precision the tradition demands are fewer each decade. Younger women in coastal towns increasingly choose alternatives whose symbolic vocabulary is legible to the wider world and whose UV protection comes from commercially manufactured material rather than from the specific structural form the burqa evolved to provide. What is lost when a burqa is replaced by sunscreen and a different form of covering is not a costume. It is a library whose last readers are aging. The language that remembered everything. Across the strait, on the Omani side, approximately 25 miles from the Iranian coastline across open water, the village of Qumzar occupies a position of geographic isolation so complete that it produced something almost no other place on Earth has produced. A language belonging exclusively to the approximately 4,000 people who live here, constructed from accumulated fragments of Persian, Arabic, Portuguese, Hindi, Baluchi, and several other tongues deposited by centuries of maritime traffic passing through the strait without staying. Qumzari is, in linguistic terms, a record of the strait's entire commercial and imperial history compressed into the daily speech of a single isolated community. Every civilization that used the strait as a corridor left traces in the vocabulary of the people who watched them pass. The Portuguese, who controlled the strait's southern approaches in the 16th century, contributed words that survive in Qumzari today, nearly 500 years after Portuguese commercial and military power in the Gulf collapsed entirely. The Hindi traders, who moved goods between the subcontinent and the Gulf ports, left their own layer. The Persian speakers, who have surrounded the community across its entire history, left the grammatical skeleton around which all the other fragments assembled. For the people of Qumzar, this language is not a curiosity or an artifact. It is how they think. It is the medium in which they argue, joke, negotiate, grieve, and make plans. The village's physical isolation, reachable only by sea across a journey of at least an hour from the nearest road, and occasionally cut off entirely during periods of rough water, preserved the language from the homogenizing pressure that dissolves linguistic distinctiveness wherever large-scale connectivity arrives. Connectivity tends to make places more alike. Isolation tends to protect what made them different. Every summer, when temperatures in the enclosed bay rise beyond habitability, the entire community of Qumzar relocates together to higher ground or to the coast of the peninsula, maintaining a collective seasonal migration that has almost certainly been practiced for centuries, and that functions as a community cohesion mechanism as much as a climate adaptation strategy. A village that moves together stays together in ways that a village that disperses individually does not. The threat to Qumzari is generational. Young people who leave for Qasab or Muscat for work and education bring back the dominant languages of the surrounding world and find diminishing use for a language that is not legible beyond the village. The conditions that produced Qumzari, maritime traffic, and generational isolation in equal measure, no longer operate together. The traffic continues. The isolation does not. What is lost when Qumzari is lost is not a collection of unusual sounds. It is a living archive, an irreplaceable record of every force that has shaped the Strait of Hormuz across 5 centuries of global history, encoded in the only medium that preserves experience completely, which is the mouth of a person who speaks without thinking about what they know. The water between everything. The strait, at its narrowest point, measures 33 kilometers across. Through that passage, on any given day, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil move in supertankers, whose individual length exceeds 300 meters. The shipping lanes themselves are each only 3 kilometers wide, meaning that vessels the size of floating cities navigate a corridor with margins that, at the speeds and drafts involved, allow almost no room for error. The marine pilots who board incoming vessels in the Gulf of Oman and guide them through the passage treat this corridor not as a geopolitical symbol, but as a working environment that demands the specific alertness of someone whose profession and survival depend on reading moving water correctly. Below the tanker traffic, the fish move in the same patterns they have always moved, following the current upwellings that concentrate nutrients and attract the species that smaller species follow, and so on down through the trophic structure of a sea that has been doing this since before any nation claimed authority over the water above it. The fishermen who set nets in the strait's margins, working from small wooden boats within sight of supertankers, are operating in the same water by entirely different logic. The tanker traffic is background noise. The fish are the signal. The knowledge of where the fish concentrate in which season, in which current, at which depth, is held in the same intergenerational form as the wind tower angle and the Lenge hull curve. It was never written because writing was not the medium available and because the knowledge was too complex and too contextual to translate into text without losing the precision that made it useful. The strait carries both things simultaneously. The most abstracted form of global economic dependency, crude oil measured in millions of barrels representing the energy architecture of industrial civilization, and the most intimate form of ecological knowledge, accumulated observation of where a specific fish species gathers in October compared to March. These two realities occupy the same water without acknowledging each other. They represent entirely different relationships to the same geography, and neither is equipped to understand what the other knows. What Hormuz actually is. The Strait of Hormuz is a corridor through which the modern world's most essential commodity flows under the perpetual theoretical threat of interruption. This is accurate. It is also the least interesting true thing about this place. What this place actually is, looked at without the geopolitical frame that the news constructed and the media repeated until it became the only available version, is a set of overlapping human experiments in survival under conditions of extremity. A coral system that adapted its biology to temperatures that kill coral everywhere else, and in doing so, stored within its own tissue information that the warming world desperately needs. A mangrove forest that grows in salt water through a mechanism millions of years in the making, producing as a side effect the nursery on which the food security of coastal communities depends. An island, whose mineral geology feeds the people who live on it in the most literal sense. A village that developed from centuries of watching empires pass through a water gap, a language that no empire left behind as a gift, but that accumulated anyway in the mouths of the people who stayed. Wind towers built without instruments that cool stone buildings without electricity, using air that has always been there. 366 wells managed in rotation to preserve a freshwater reserve that could not sustain the community if used without system. Boats built entirely from knowledge held in hands and eyes passed from father to son across centuries without a single drawing being made. A face covering that began as sun protection and became a library. A language assembled from the linguistic debris of 5 centuries of passing traffic. These are technologies, not in the modern sense of devices and systems produced by specialized knowledge for general application, but in the older sense of solutions refined through sustained engagement with specific problems over time. They are responses to a question that everyone living here has always faced and that the rest of the world is beginning to face now. What do you do when the conditions of your existence are not comfortable, not stable, not guaranteed, and show no signs of becoming any of those things? The answer that Hormuz has been working on for centuries is not a single answer. It is a body of answers embedded in architecture and language and biological tissue and the angle at which a craftsman sets a keel. None of it was designed as a lesson. All of it functions as one. The strait is 33 kilometers wide. It contains more than any 33 kilometers should be able to hold. And the most important things it contains are the ones that no satellite image, no tanker manifest, no geopolitical threat assessment has ever been designed to see. The world is learning, with increasing urgency, what it means to live under conditions that will not improve on their own. Hormuz has known for a very long time. The question is whether we arrive curious enough to understand what it has spent centuries learning to say.